Okay, today's research is actually based on my PhD thesis. Yeah, I did a field work back in 2015 and 2016. And the data could be a little bit out of date because, like nowadays, is probably when we talk about mobile practices, it could be a quite different story compared to like 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, but still, I hope like this research can deliver some insights into the migration context and the mobile practices of those female migrant workers. So this is actually the picture captured during my fieldwork. My fieldwork was conducted in the fruit can factory in Dalian. And this is kind of like a typical thing that I've observed wildly in that factory. This is a female migrant worker, and she was sitting between the boxes of the products, and then she was checking her phone. And of course, during that time, it's kind of like mobile practices were deeply integrated into their social activities, into their social networks, into their like professional sphere as well as the private sphere. Like they use a mobile phone for dating, they use a mobile phone for looking for jobs, they also use a mobile phone to maintain the connections with their families. So this is where the journey started. So when I jumped in the factory, actually like I started with 2 questions, but these 2 questions were still quite vague at the beginning of my research. I was thinking about like what will be the role of mobile communication in these migrant women's daily lives, including their professional life as well as their personal life. And the second question is more towards their mobile phone use and the gender construction processes. So especially here, I would like to introduce the context, the background of my research, where my research comes from. Like, thank you, Vincent, that you already introduced like a lot about the context. So I'll just give probably a bit more details regarding the context. So the first context is about the migration. So economic reform gave rise to the thriving manufacturing industries, and this has led to a huge demand for low-wage labor force. And the central government consequently revised the household registration system. And this further diminishes the previously strict division between the rural and urban populations. Within this context, till nowadays, there are millions of female urban migrant workers in China who join different industries as cheap labor force. However, it is quite important to note that while the policy allowed for the migratory mobility of rural peasants to fill urban job vacancies, they normally possess the very limited access to the welfare system, which means that they are usually confined to restricted physical and social mobility. These migrant workers consequently become floating populations, compelled by economic incentives to leave rural hometowns, yet normally they failed to settle down and integrate into urban destinations. So the second important context of this research is a continuing gender struggles that many female migrant workers are facing. On the one hand, the migration of these rural women enabled them to transcend the long-standing traditional gender labor division, like basically men rule outside while women rule inside, 男主外,女主内. Women who used to follow established gender trajectories in villages could now achieve financial independence and pursuing personal autonomy. However, this newly acquired economic resources alongside exposure to booming communist culture and urban lifestyles usually fuel their material as well as a cultural transformation. So that is why I want to actually introduce 2 important studies here and also cite these 2 works in my research. Yeah, one is a a piece of research from Eric Ma and his colleague. And this research was titled Naked Body. Naked body here is actually a metaphor. So it is a metaphor to portray that women's bold attempts and intimate experiences, such as engaging in affairs with male migrant workers to seek transient sexual comfort, as well as exhibiting close physical interactions with men in the public space. And another important work that I want to introduce here is from Pan Yi. And this is a book named Made in China. And in this book, Pan also reviews audacious discussion in this women's dormitory concerning their curiosity, puzzles, and newly accumulated knowledge about sexuality. However, experienced modernity in the urban host societies are meshed with traditional elements. So family members keeps on imposing gendered practices, such as urging the single migrant women into marriage, and then also like hold the very traditional expectations on them as filial daughters, 孝女. So the married ones are also expected to fulfill the maternal duties regardless of their physical absence in rural families. Also in the workplace, the rural women were usually labeled as 打工妹. Okay, so which means the young sisters working for the boss. Just from these labels, you can say that these women are expected to be obedient and compliant to their urban employers. So the gender social expectations easily expose them to sexual objectification in post-migration lives. So why my research highlights the role of mobile communication in the migrant women's gender construction and negotiation processes? It is also due to an extensive adoption and usage of mobile communication by the migrant groups in the past 2 decades. The prosperous domestic mobile industries combined with inexpensive low-end brands overseas enable those low-income social groups to afford mobile devices and consume the mobile services. So here is a book by Carol Wallace. This book is titled Techno-Mobility in China, Young Migrant Women and the Mobile Phones. So in this book, Carol has documented that mobile communication plays a critical role in migrant women's daily life in China. And mobile communication helps them connect with rural family members and develop new social networks in cities. So combining all these factors together, I came up with a very general research question. That is how mobile practices are associated with gender construction processes of the rural-urban female migrant workers in China. My research views the gender construction processes of these migrant women as ongoing and also full of dynamics. Especially, it is interesting to look at the struggles faced by the migrant women, given the tension between the tradition and modernity. Therefore, the study aims to propose a research approach to unpack the gender digital phenomenon occurring in the context of China's internal migration. So why do we need a unique and contextualized approach here? It is important to note that in the past few decades, there are actually quite a few studies that have examined mobile communication and gender empowerment in diverse marginalized contexts. However, when we put all the studies together, this study trended towards a gender empowerment or disempowerment dichotomy, which means that, well, the techno-determinist view and suggested that mobile technology could be the generator of gender equality. The opposing strand is more likely to embrace the structural functionalism, which means like they tend to emphasize the perpetuation of structural hierarchies that would prevent mobile practices by women from making any impact upon the marginalized experiences. So here are a couple of examples. So like for the techno-determinist stream, actually these scholars tend to believe that the mobile communication, the mobile devices will bring the women at the margin of the society, the economic empowerment in the first place. And economic empowerment could be transformed into the resources for these women to negotiate for a better gender status, to negotiate with the patriarchal hierarchy. For instance, this is one example from Xiong and Trory. And in this study, they believe that the mobiles can improve the professional efficiency, which would encourage female fishmongers in Dhaka to search for social and political emancipation outside patriarchal social cultural structures. Of course, we also have studies that come from the other side that is more likely to believe that the mobile communication could not make any change to the marginalization faced by those women. For instance, the study from Huang, actually this study noted that the embedded poverty and gender differentiated labor division in conjunction with the social tradition and expectations recurrently coerce the female entrepreneurs into Nairobi, into the double burdens. So in this study, actually the author talk about like how the mobile devices make those women have to handle both the burdens from their business as well as the burdens from their household. And of course, there are a couple of studies talking about how mobile communication may just place women under constant surveillance and monitoring from their female members. This is one example study from Hannaford. It documented how mobile communication enabled Senegalese migrant husbands to translate their suspicion into active surveillance of their wives left behind in their hometowns. So also an emergent set of studies start to transcend the dichotomy of to foreground the contextually situated agency. So which means that, of course, like not everybody is kind of like falling under this dichotomy. There is kind of like one nascent stream of researchers that tends to investigate the contextualized agency of this woman. So this study started to recognize that to a certain degree, women will be able to employ the phones to get empowered. However, it is very important to note here that such empowerment might not be equivalent to an immediate achievement of gender equality, which was always assumed of like as one of the major consequences by the early studies. So for instance, in the case of Vietnamese foreign brides in Singapore, empowerment for them is to use a phone for a better performance as good wives. So this is a study from Huang and her colleagues. So in this study, actually, the empowerment for these migrant brides is to use the mobile phone for better performance of the good wives. Only in so doing, they can obtain a good sense of themselves to cope with marginalized migrant experiences. So, however, it is important to note that despite the efforts, these studies only exhibit their theoretical these studies also exhibit their theoretical gaps. Their research focus less in the individual changes. However, most of them fail to take a look at the possible changes happening at the meso or even societal level. Secondly, they tend to view mobile practices as a black box, and the usage of mobile practices will only lead towards the same gender social impacts from their perspectives. However, they fail to take a look at the nuances of mobile practices, especially probably different mobile practices can lead towards different gender consequences. So to fill in the gap, like my research provides a framework by bridging the perspective of intersectionality with theory of structuration. Actually, like in my later publications, I kind of like separate these two series and then try to like employ them individually and then try to like develop a new angle from each of the series. However, like in my PhD dissertation, I kind of like just combine them together because I think these two series can work together to provide a very comprehensive approach to understand like the interactions between the agency and intersected social structures and how mobile phones can play a part inside. So through this lens, the mobile phone used by those marginalized women is understood in the dynamic interactions between their agency as well as their situated social structures. Which means on the one hand, this approach considers the intersectional influences from gender, class, and other social structures, which may impact upon how the marginalized women adopt and use the mobile phone. On the other hand, this approach also gives rise to the research subjects, let them articulate their strategies of mobile phone usage and the purpose of using the mobile phones. Therefore, the research questions are specified into two. The first question is about whether and how mobile phone use further exposes women to intersected social structural constraints, while the second question is about whether and how mobile phone use may facilitate their enactment of strategies to act upon the constraints for individual interests and desires. So you can see like these two questions, one emphasizes the structural constraints and the mobile phone, while the other one actually emphasizes on individual agency and the mobile phone. Okay, so here is a brief introduction about my research site. So my fieldwork was conducted in the rural suburb of Dalian across the year of 2015 and 2016, as what I've mentioned at the beginning of the study. At the beginning of this seminar, it was kind of like quite far away, around like 6 years ago. So I just give a very brief introduction about Dalian, just in case like not all of you are from China, or maybe not all of you are from northern China. Dalian is one of the economic and trade center along the north coast of China. And where I have conducted this research was in Paotai. Paotai is kind of like one suburb of Dalian. It is located at the outskirts of Dalian, and it is a combination of economic development zone and bonded area. It's quite interesting to note that just during my fieldwork in 2015, the Paotai suburb was one county-level district of Dalian, which means like it is out of the Dalian city area. However, in 2016, Paotai officially became a part of urban area of Dalian. So it's basically across these 2 years, like I also witnessed the urbanization of Paotai, like the location of my fieldwork. And the canned fruit processing factory is one of the leading enterprises in Paotai. And where I have conducted my research, the enterprise was established in the early 1990s. So you can say like it's actually a quite traditional and old enterprise. And it was registered as a private company in the early 2000s and a group company in mid-2010s. So these two pictures are actually from my field work, and you can see the left picture kind of like portrays those women. They were picking the fruits, like they were preparing the fruits for like the can processing. They're kind of like picked out the rotten fruits and just keep the high quality ones. Well, the right one is more like a demonstration of the workshop, and women were working together and they chopped the fruits into small pieces, and later they were going to stuff the fruits into the cans for the further processing. So this factory allowed a very rich sample pool, and I was able to draw the research respondents from the pool, because during the very busy season of the factory, which usually happened in July and August, and this factory will like hire over 1,000 female migrant workers across the country. In addition, these female workers usually represented very diversified age groups, ranging from 20s to 50s. And also they have different like marital statuses, including a single one, married one, and divorced one. And moreover, this woman also came from like different villages around China, as what I've just mentioned, which largely reduced the geographical bias of the data. So now let's take a look at the main methods adopted here. So the major research methods were qualitative interviewing and observation, And I adopted snowball sampling that enabled the recruitment of 43 female migrant workers as participants. And as noted, the ages of participants ranged from 20s to 50 years old. And the major research methods were qualitative interviewing and observation. The flexible and open-ended nature of the qualitative interviewing enables us to understand the complexity of the women's mobile phone practices, while the onset observation actually served as a complementary method, fostering examination of the phenomenon by triangulation. And sometimes, like when we had the permission from those migrant workers, we also like extended our observation on their mobile phone usage. So from this picture, you can see the left one is actually a dormitory of those migrant women, and like with their permission, sometimes they would bring us to their more private space within the factory, and we conducted interviews over there because this private environment could probably like provide them a better sense of security, and it's more convenient for them to talk about their private stories compared to the workshops, which are more likely to be the public space. And the right picture is just like a public account subscription of on one respondent's WeChat. So we can say like sometimes like when we talk, like when we keep on talking, and then we would ask some questions like, is it possible for us to take a look at your phone? Yeah, and then some of them would say like, yeah, of course. And then in this way, like we kind of like can observe, okay, what exactly happened on their phone. And here is just like a very general description of the demographic information of our respondents. And you can say that most of the respondents are in their 20s, yeah, around 18 of them, 18 of the 43 respondents. And like some, like 9 are around 30 and 10 are around 40s. And 6 is like 50s and above. It's quite important to note here that like usually for the younger migrant workers, they will hold a fixed contract with a factory. However, for the elder ones, they're more likely to be the temporary employees of the factory. Yeah, sometimes they only came to the factory just like during the summer for July and August, those busy seasons, and then they will just go back to the village. So actually, like the age, I would like to say, like is a very critical factor that may influence a lot about like the life experiences of the migrant women in the city. And this is their hometown distribution. Yeah, we can say like most of them are from Heilongjiang, because like Dalian is probably closer to Heilongjiang, which is also another important province in the northern east of China, and some are from other different places. Yeah, this is a work status distribution. And interestingly, we interviewed 3 group leaders. This group leaders is more like they develop themselves into the group leaders, like through their professional performance, and the rest of them are just ordinary workers. Like this group leaders actually provided a lot of interesting stories about like, especially the professional struggles of the women in the urban settings. Yeah, and this is a marital status, and we can see like 10 were single and 29 were married and 4 were divorced. Yeah, actually, like although it's not kind of like the focus of my study, but I really think that sometimes like those divorced women, they will have a lot of interesting stories to explore, because divorce itself like is probably already a resistance against the traditional rules. So like of course, like here I probably won't have enough time to talk about that, but yeah, like I would say like it will be a very interesting angle. And you can see like 33 have children and 10 do not really have children. And coming to the mobile phone distribution, this is another interesting demographic information. 33 had smartphone, because back in 2015 and 2016, like most of people could afford smartphone during that time. However, 9 still used feature phone and 2 did not use mobile phone at all. Yeah, so in total, we got 65 recordings of interviews paired with ethnographic notes, and also we use an open coding approach through constant comparison. Yeah, so basically like me and also one of my co-author, we just like keep on reading those notes and then like summarize the topics. So in general, like we have two sections in our findings. Yeah, so the first section is more like a response to the research question 1. It's more about like how mobile phone use further expose women to the social structure constraints. So here we've noticed that the mobile phone will usually like further like expose this further like marginalize the women through like access, through imposing surveillance, and also through like intervention. And on the other hand, we also found like, okay, the mobile phone also play a part in facilitate their enactment of strategies to display their agency and to pursue their individual interests and desires. And these strategies include avoidance, accommodation, and collaboration. So here I would just like talk about like different strategies as well as different constraints one by one. So here, let's first come to the constraints. So what is access? The definition of access is actually quite simple and straightforward. It means that the mobile phone opens up like communicative channels for those possessing elevated patriarchal status, which means a higher patriarchal status, to extend their offline hierarchical power to mobile spaces. So how to understand it? Probably I feel like this sentence is quite conceptualized. I'll just give a very easy example. For many migrant women, the mobile phone is actually the gift, either from their families or from their husbands. But why they have this gift from their families and husband? Because the original purpose of gifting the mobile phone is to make them stay connected. So you can say that in this way, the mobile phone has already become a tool to access the women continuously. Like for some women who stayed apart from their families, or like who stayed apart from their husbands, their husband or their fathers or their mothers would just keep on calling them, like maybe every day or every week, and keep on checking them. Where are you? How are you? And what are you doing? So this is kind of like the access to this woman's like life, no matter like about like their professional life or about their personal life. So this is the first finding of this study that is about access, the usage of the mobile phone to access the woman or to identify the woman. And of course, this type of access also happened in the professional sphere, because we noticed that like this factory have a very sophisticated and also complicated like WeChat group settings. Like they basically like duplicated different levels of management in their WeChat groups. Like I would just talk about like WeChat group at the bottom. It usually include like one group leader as well as 6 group members. And in these WeChat groups, the group leader and their group members would just communicate about the tasks, about the duties, and about the time and locations, and so on and so forth. So here is one example of this type of WeChat group. And this WeChat group, like by using the concept from Peng and Chuang, is more like a microelectronic panopticon, which means that the group leaders through these WeChat groups can always keep an eye on their subordinates, on their workers. And like no matter where the subordinates, where the workers are, or when, or like at which time, they could always access them and then just deliver like the orders, and also check whether they have fulfilled the task or not. The second finding is about the surveillance. Surveillance is more like the next step of access. Just accessing this woman will not be enough, because the purpose of accessing is to impose the surveillance. So here, like access paves the way for surveillance, and the mobile practice that places women under constant monitoring. And but it's important to note that the varied mobile affordances may shape the surveillance into diversified forms in terms of monitoring women in different ways. I'll just give some examples. For instance, The voice call, because we all know like the voice call is usually between the two people. So this type of surveillance is more private. And also another important nature of voice call is it is real time. So that is why like whenever there's a voice call, that probably like when you pick it, then you have to report, okay, what you are doing exactly, right? However, this is never the end of the story. When we think about a video call, we can say that actually the surveillance can be escalated, because when you talk to someone on phone, when it is just like a vocal talk, you probably like, okay, you can either like maybe just like blur some details about what you're doing. However, when it comes to video call, like there is very less level of ambiguity that you can manage, you can manipulate, because the person on the other side of the phone will immediately say, okay, where are you and how you look like. So this type of surveillance, you can say that this intrusion could be escalated because you can never hide anything. You could not hide the details about the location, about the current things that you're doing right now. Yeah, and another type of surveillance could happen in the mobile WeChat group. Yeah, probably I know like many of us do not like WeChat group, because especially we don't want to engage in a lot of conversations on WeChat group, because like we all know like WeChat group engage a lot of parties to communicate at the same time. And it's different from the voice call or video call that is more like a private space. The mobile group is more like a public space. No matter what you say, everybody can say that. And I have like two very interesting examples about mobile group surveillance. One is about their private life and one about their professional life. So about the private life, here is one sentence from one of the respondents. I would just give like some context information about it. Like this girl was around 28 years old. So, you know, like based on the village rules is the time to get married. However, she was not married yet. She was still single around that time. So like during the, like it's kind of like a family time in a WeChat group, then like there will be like auntie, like maybe like auntie, sister, like it's just like remote family member will just like shout in the group and then question her like, oh, why Xiong like still not have a partner at such an age? Do you need me to introduce one to you? So you can see like this girl can be quite embarrassed in like because of this, right? Like because everybody in the group, every family member, no matter the remote family members or the close family members, they could all say this. So it's kind of like also give her like more peer pressure, like not peer pressure, more pressure about like get married. And this is another example from the WeChat groups in the workplace. Previously, we talked about like there was a WeChat group, actually several different WeChat groups to duplicate the management system in the factory. And in this WeChat group, you can say like the respondent said that when the group leader scolded me, other people can also say, and why the group leader scolded me and what mistake that I have committed. Others also can learn a lesson and not to make the same mistake. So in this way, you can say it's basically actually the same consequence, the same effect as a family group members. The major purpose is to embarrass the person and also to push like certain rules or like certain pressure on this person, and then make the person to exactly follow the rules because of the pressure. So this is a surveillance from the WeChat group. And now let's come to the intervention. So intervention is a means of social control over women by actively coercing their behavioral modification with technologically mediated means. It ranges from managing mobile practices of women to confiscation of their mobile devices for a complete ban on usage. So I will not talk about like managing mobile practices of women. There are also like quite a couple examples here. I would just directly go to like how the family members could ban their mobile phone usage. Like here is an example from a girl, actually like she rejected like to it's basically like she was dating someone around that time who was also a factory worker, a male factory worker. However, her dad was strongly against this relationship. However, she still wanted to continue the relationship. So that led toward like her dad actually confiscate her mobile devices. So this is the description about what happened to her. So my dad did not allow me to work outside again, forcing me to come back home and took away my phone. He locked my phone and claimed clearly that I could not use the mobile phone. I was always afraid of my dad. My dad put my mobile phone away, shut it down, and then even put out the telephone landline. So you can see like that completely cut off her connections with a guy or with the outside world. I think it's quite important to know that nowadays, we all know like mobile phone is also part of our identity. So when you ban a person's usage of mobile phone, it's basically you're also denying her identity. Okay, so now let's come to the strategies. Let's talk about something like more positive. Yeah, so the first strategy that adopted by women to cope with the constraints is through avoidance. So what is avoidance? Avoidance is not to deploy the phone to engage in direct communication. Instead, the women hide their mobile communication from access and surveillance. So I'll just give you some examples about like how these women should use the mobile phone to avoid the surveillance and control. So the first one is they usually like block certain people from their mobile spaces. Sometimes, you know, like they may share some information that they feel like they could be empowered from the information. However, this information could never ever be accessed by their family members because they know like these family members will not allow them like to kind of like spread out this type of information. So one information is the first paragraph here. Like this is actually like some articles, the titles of articles from the public accounts that these women subscribed after like leaving their villages and coming to the city. And from these titles, you can see like those words were quite bold. If a husband drive your wife crazy, it is your failure. Yeah, you can sense like a certain feminist thinking over there, right? It's kind of like instead of blaming the women, once like the husband drive the wife crazy, it is a husband fault. And another one is each couple is not afraid of fighting, but afraid of not talking to each other. So you can see like there is certain type of like self-consciousness over there. Yes, like that is why they love to share this type of contents on the mobile phones. Like mobile phone just open a channel for them to share the contents with their close friends, with people they feel like they can understand them. Instead of people they think like they cannot understand. That is why they just block this type of like information to their like from their families on their WeChat moments. So their families could not see this information, but they enjoy reading this type of information and share the information with other like maybe friends. Yeah, and the second one, instead of blocking, like women also learn like which type of information they should delete to protect their privacy if they do not want an intervention with their privacy. So here is a case is that I delete everything. Now my sister came back to check my phone. She won't find anything. So the background here is quite similar to the last story. It's also like the girl secretly dated a guy who is another factory worker. However, like her sister kept on telling her like, oh, if you want to settle down in this city, you should date like an urban citizen. You should not date another migrant worker who is a man, another male migrant worker. So that is why like she just preferred to delete everything. Like she just did not want her sister to say what she is doing. She just wants to pursue this love. However, she does not want to have any like confrontation with her sister. So this is actually the gist of avoiding. Like they do not really confront directly, because sometimes maybe they were not so powerful or like they were not so confident to confront directly that they will win the battle. However, they will just use a mobile phone to manage their privacy, to manage their small world, to nurture their self-consciousness. So let's come to the second strategy, that is accommodation. However, the accommodation is more like a superficial accommodation. Like on the surface, they will like just agree with what their parents, what are telling them to do. However, like just behind the family's back, they could manage their own things. It's quite similar to avoidance, but accommodation is a little bit different because in the context of accommodation, it means that their families have already given them certain orders. However, they do not really follow it. And instead, like they just like pretend that they accommodate. However, they did something behind the back. Yeah, for instance, like ask my uncle for my phone number. So what about this story? This story is, again, is about like intimacy. Like this female worker, like actually she was asked by another male worker about her phone number. But instead of giving the male worker the phone number directly, she told the male worker, you can ask my uncle who was working at the same factory about my phone number. Yeah, so you can see like this is more like accommodate first, because like in a very like patriarchal culture in China, is sometimes like the male family members could master the decision-making power about a female's choice of their partners. So instead of giving the number directly, she said like, how about you just ask my uncle first? Of course, this could also be, you know, like certain type of, it could be a bit risky, because what if her uncle did not give the guy her mobile phone number? So this is like, you know, like accommodation actually also requires like maybe a better understanding of the relationship and also that person. So this is like how this girl managed like her relationship. So in this way, he could date this guy, and also he could not like, it's not necessary for her to kind of like confront her uncle in the meanwhile. And another interesting thing is about the rise of female leadership, because I've mentioned I interviewed 3 female group leaders during the field work. And for the female group leaders, like, well, they follow the rules of the factory to manage the workers, they also gradually developed their professional efficiency, their professional efficacy. Yeah, so which means like in the, although like they kind of like subject themselves to the capitalist management, but in the meanwhile, they keep on gaining their resources, no matter social resources and economic resources, to develop themselves. And the mobile phone is definitely play an important part inside, because the mobile space become their stage, like how they perform the rules, how they operate the professional relationships. So the last one is about collaboration. Collaboration is more like escalation of like individual self-consciousness. It's more like a collaborations between the individuals that could result in an emergent collective power. Yeah, so I'm not sure, like, yeah. So here is an interesting example happening in the professional group workers. So basically this male worker wanted to kind of like provocated the female workers. So he said that let's check in the hotel when we were drunk. Yeah. And then one female said that we should go to the hotel one day when we are sober. So you can see like the confrontation already happened there, right? In the group, because in the group, the woman knows like there will be other female workers who could back her up, for such as this one. Another female workers just followed, like he needs to be encouraged by uncle, otherwise he would not dare. So you can see this type of collaborations between women to confront the sexual harassment in the workplace. So although like it's also happening in the WeChat groups, we can see like the multi facets of the WeChat group. Like it could be the place to impose the surveillance and control, but it can also be the place that women can work together, can collaborate with each other, can back up each other, and then to confront the man. Also, like in the WeChat groups, like sometimes the woman can share some interesting contents. Like for instance, this one, to judge whether a woman is wealthy, you should like look at her shoes, whether she is romantic, then look at her pajama. I find that I have nothing, but I still feel so alive. Haha. And then another woman said, so true. Yeah, so you can see this type of collaborations, this type of information happening in these WeChat groups. It's just fascinating. Yeah, so let's come to the conclusion. Yeah, so basically, like my study, you can see like they're kind of like opposing power, like one to another, like one go against another. So on the one hand, we observed that actually the mobile phone could reinforce the structural forces through assisting access, surveillance, and intervention. And in a way, it actually facilitates the extension of traditional patriarchy. However, on the other hand, the mobile phone also boosts the individual transformation through facilitating their strategies such as avoidance, accommodation, and collaboration. And we can see that individual transformation could be escalated, could be leveraged into the emergent networks, emergent collaborations among the women. And in a way, it could enhance their embracement of modernity. So that is why, like in general, through the usage of mobile phones, we can say that the reinforced struggles mediated by the mobile phone practices of these women. And we can sense like their nascent of self-consciousness, although this nascent of self-consciousness of their own values could always be accompanied by structural constraints. So now is almost the end of my talk, and I'll just leave one question to you guys. That is how to define gender empowerment from the perspectives of female migrant workers in China. Yeah, please feel free to talk about your thoughts, and probably we can leave it at Q&A session. Just before we jump to the Q&A session, I want to talk about like also I have a bunch of publications based on this field work, like include one at New Media Society. So this one is quite similar to what I've talked today. And another one that is on Journal of Ethnic Migration Studies. So in that study, actually, I used the polymedia approach. And also there is one published at the Oxford Handbook of Mobile Communication. That's in that article, I and my colleague actually conceptualized a term, which is mgender. And also there is another one that focuses on the mobile practices to cope with sexual harassment in the workplace. And that one was published in Information Communication Society. If you're interested, yeah, like just please, like you can ask me for a copy or you can just search it online.